3:47 a.m., February 18, 2026, Miami, Florida. 14 Secret Service financial crimes agents moved through the lobby of a converted warehouse on NW 22nd Street. Weapons low, flashlight beams cutting across glass partitions, and standing desks still littered with cold coffee cups from the night shift. Behind them, 6 HSI agents secured the loading dock, communicating in short bursts over encrypted radio, watching a rear access road that ran along a drainage canal. 2 unmarked vehicles idled a block away, engines running, in case anyone tried to run the perimeter. Estimated laundered value, $97 million. The building sign read Shoreline Logistics AI, glass walls, standing desks, a mural of a cargo ship painted across the break room. On the surface, a 22-person startup selling shipping route optimization software to mid-sized freight brokers struggling through the Strait of Hormuz shutdown. Underneath, a financial pipeline moving sanctioned Iranian oil revenue through ghost fleet shell contracts, dressed up as algorithmic consulting fees. By dawn, 3 executives would be in custody, a 4th would be missing. And the agents standing in that lobby at 3:47 a.m. still didn't know how deep the network actually ran. 6 months earlier, none of this existed on paper. The company had no public laundering footprint, no obvious red flags, nothing that would trigger an automated compliance alert. It looked, on every visible metric, like a normal Series A logistics tech company riding a wartime shipping crisis. That was the point. The Strait of Hormuz blockade had thrown global shipping insurers into chaos. Freight companies were rerouting tankers around active U.S. Navy interdiction zones, repricing risk hourly, scrambling for software that could model alternate routes in real time. Shoreline Logistics AI built exactly that: algorithmic route optimization, dynamic insurance modeling, real-time vessel tracking dashboards. Demand was real. Clients were real. The software worked. The invoicing behind it did not match anything that actually moved. 29-year-old Renata Kovac had founded the company in late 2024, a former maritime insurance analyst with a master's degree in supply chain engineering. Colleagues from her previous firm described her as meticulous, the kind of analyst who flagged discrepancies in cargo manifests. Other underwriters waved through without a second look. That same precision, investigators would later argue, made her uniquely capable of building an invoicing structure clean enough to survive routine audits for nearly 4 months. By October 2025, Shoreline had 11 employees and a modest seed round. By December, headcount had jumped to 22, and the company had moved into the NW 22nd Street warehouse, citing rapid client growth tied to the Hormuz crisis. What the public didn't see, starting in November 2025, a cluster of new clients appeared on Shoreline's books. Freight brokerages registered in the Marshall Islands, Cyprus, and Liberia. Companies with no employees listed on any public registry. Companies paying Shoreline 6- and 7-figure logistics consulting fees for route optimization services that, according to the platform's own usage logs, were never actually queried. The pattern was small at first: 1 client, then 3, then 9. By January 2026, Shoreline's revenue had grown 340% in 90 days. On paper, it looked like a startup catching lightning in a bottle during a shipping crisis. What nobody at the company, and almost nobody outside it, understood yet was that the lightning wasn't coming from clients. It was coming from somewhere else entirely. Secret Service Special Agent Daniel Reyes worked financial crimes out of the Miami field office. In January 2026, an automated SAR, a suspicious activity report, landed on his desk from a regional bank processing Shoreline's incoming wires. The trigger wasn't dramatic. It was a pattern. 26% of Shoreline's incoming payments were structured just below the $10,000 reporting threshold, then reaggregated days later into single larger transfers. Industry average for legitimate consulting fee structuring, under 2%. That number couldn't exist in a legitimate business. Reyes pulled the SAR alongside 3 others filed over the previous 6 weeks, all referencing wires tied to the same cluster of shell freight brokerages. None of the brokerages had a working phone number. 2 listed the same registered agent address in Limassol, Cyprus, a P.O. box shared by over 400 other companies. I went through the case file later, and one detail kept nagging at investigators from day one. Shoreline's own platform logs showed almost none of these clients had ever logged into the software they were paying 6 figures a month to use. Reyes brought the file to Homeland Security Investigations. HSI's Financial Crimes Unit had been separately tracking a different problem since October 2025. A network of ghost fleet tankers rerouting through international waters to avoid U.S. Navy interdiction near the Strait of Hormuz. Vessels suspected of carrying sanctioned Iranian crude under falsified flags. Neither agency had connected the two threads yet. That changed on January 14th, when an HSI maritime analyst flagged a vessel, the tanker Halcyon Star, flying a Panamanian flag, last verified ownership traced through 3 holding companies, making an unscheduled stop off the coast of the Bahamas. 11 hours later, a $4.1 million wire left a Bahamian Shell account and landed, through 2 intermediary accounts, in Shoreline Logistics' operating account, labeled Q1 Routing Analytics Retainer. The tanker had never used Shoreline's software. The company had no maritime tracking contract with any vessel matching that registration. That was the moment the case changed shape. This wasn't a startup with sloppy bookkeeping. This was a sanctions-evasion network using a real, functioning AI logistics company as a laundering front, moving Iranian oil revenue through invoices nobody would ever audit, because on paper, every fee matched a plausible service in an industry already drowning in wartime chaos. Reyes and HSI Special Agent Priya Nair opened a joint case on January 20th. Case designation, Operation Driftwood. The early team was small, 4 agents, no warrants yet, surveillance only. What strikes investigators about this case, looking back, is how little of it depended on anything illegal looking. No cash in duffel bags, no coded phone calls, just invoices that were technically plausible, and a software platform whose own data quietly proved they weren't real. Surveillance began the 3rd week of January. Agents tracked Shoreline's executive movements, financial flows, and the company's relationship with a man named Aram Pakzad, listed on no Shoreline org chart, but present at the office 4 to 5 days a week. Pakzad held Cypriot and Iranian dual citizenship. Treasury OFAC records showed no direct sanctions designation against him personally, but his name surfaced in 2 prior, unrelated sanctions-evasion investigations dating back to 2021, both closed without charges for insufficient evidence. For nearly 3 weeks, a 2-agent rotation parked across the street in a delivery van, fitted with a long-lens camera, logging Pakzad's arrival and departure times to the minute. He drove a leased gray sedan, registered to a Cyprus-based rental company, parked 2 blocks away rather than in Shoreline's lot, and never used the same entrance twice in the same week. Agents photographed him meeting briefly, twice, with a man later identified through facial recognition as a known intermediary in a 2019 sanctions case involving a different Shell network entirely. That connection, for now, remains circumstantial. One detail that stuck with the team: Pakzad never appeared in Shoreline's building access logs under his own name. He badged in as consultant A. Park. By early February, HSI had obtained a sealed financial monitoring order on 6 accounts, tied to the Shell brokerages. What they found reshaped the entire scope of the case. Between November 2025 and February 2026, roughly $97 million had moved through Shoreline's operating and subsidiary accounts in payments tied to 23 separate Shell freight entities. Of that, financial analysts traced approximately $61 million directly back to oil cargo transactions involving at least 5 tankers under active U.S. Navy monitoring for suspected sanctions violations in the Hormuz corridor. The remaining $36 million couldn't yet be traced to a clean origin point. It moved through accounts in Cyprus, the Marshall Islands, and a small private bank in Georgia, the country, not the state. Before disappearing into instruments, investigators still hadn't fully unwound by the time of the raid. The investigation nearly stalled in early February. A planned wiretap application on 2 of the Shell brokerage phone lines was denied by a reviewing judge over insufficient probable cause tied to the foreign accounts. Agents had to rebuild the affidavit using only domestic banking records and open-source maritime tracking data, delaying surveillance authorization by 9 days. 9 days during which, agents later confirmed, at least $6 million more moved through the network untracked. Reyes later described those 9 days as the worst stretch of the case. watching the wire activity in near real time on a dashboard, unable to act on any of it. Knowing every delayed signature meant money the team might never see again. They rebuilt the application using AIS satellite tracking correlation instead of foreign banking subpoenas, anchoring probable cause entirely to US-based wire activity. The revised request was approved February 11th. With the wiretap authorized, Reyes believed the hardest part of Operation Driftwood was behind them. He was wrong. 3 days later, a routine financial subpoena would surface a second, larger problem, one that had nothing to do with Iran at all, and everything to do with who inside the US financial system had been helping move the money without asking a single question. On February 14th, a compliance subpoena to Shoreline's primary bank produced something unexpected: internal email correspondence between a junior compliance officer at the bank and an unnamed Shoreline representative, dated December 2025, in which the compliance officer flagged the structuring pattern and was overruled by a regional manager who approved continued processing, citing high-growth client relationship value. The compliance officer, a 26-year-old analyst 2 years into her career, had attached a formal risk memo to the email chain, 4 pages, citing the exact same below-threshold structuring pattern that would later anchor the federal SAR. Her manager's reply, preserved in the subpoenaed records, ran 2 sentences: approval to continue processing, and a note that the client relationship was strategically important for Q4 targets. She was not disciplined. She was not promoted. She left the bank in January 2026 for an unrelated job, unaware her flagged memo would resurface weeks later as a key piece of evidence in a federal money laundering case. No evidence surfaced that the regional manager knew about Iran specifically. But the email chain made one thing clear: a basic compliance flag had been raised and dismissed for revenue reasons months before federal agents ever saw the SAR. Here's the take that'll probably get us flack. The bank's compliance failure here arguably did more damage than Shoreline's executives ever could have alone. A 22-person startup laundering $97 million is a crime. A regional bank manager overruling a flagged compliance alert for client relationship value is the reason it worked for 4 months instead of 4 weeks. Both belong in this story. Only one of them will likely see real consequences. By mid-February, the case had grown past the original 4-agent team. 14 Secret Service financial crimes agents and 6 HSI agents were now assigned. Surveillance confirmed Renata Kovach's direct knowledge of the Shell client structure through 2 recorded calls in which she discussed routing the Cyprus retainers before quarter close with her CFO, Marcus Bellamy. Bellamy, a former compliance officer at a regional bank himself, appeared to be the architect of the invoice structuring. Financial records later showed Bellamy had personally drafted templates for the Shell brokerage consulting agreements, contracts written to closely mirror Shoreline's legitimate client paperwork, down to identical clause language, making automated red flag detection nearly impossible. There's a grim irony investigators kept circling back to. The same compliance training that once taught him to spot structuring patterns was, agents believe, exactly what he used to design ones that would slip past them. Aram Pakzad remained the unresolved variable. Surveillance placed him at the office regularly through early February. After February 16th, 2 days before the raid, he stopped appearing on building access logs entirely. What do you think? Did Pakzad get tipped off, or did he simply finish his part of the operation and walk away on schedule? Investigators still aren't sure. By February 17th, agents had enough for arrest and search warrants on Shoreline's offices, Kovach's residence, Bellamy's residence, and 3 of the Shell brokerage's US-based banking relationships. What they didn't have yet, and wouldn't have until hours before the raid, was confirmation of where Pakzad had gone, or whether he'd taken anything with him. The operation was scheduled for February 18th, pre-dawn, timed to coincide with both a scheduled bank transfer the team wanted to intercept mid-process and minimal foot traffic at the warehouse office. At 2:40 a.m., 90 minutes before the planned breach, the lead surveillance team lost visual on the building's rear loading dock when a fog bank rolled in off Biscayne Bay, cutting visibility to under 30 feet. With a possible secondary exit unmonitored, the entry team adjusted in the field, repositioning 2 agents to cover the dock on foot rather than by camera, which delayed breach time by 22 minutes, while command confirmed the perimeter was secure. Reyes later said, "Those 22 minutes felt longer than the 9-day wiretap delay combined," standing in a parking lot in zero visibility, unable to confirm whether anyone inside the building knew they were coming. At 3:47 a.m., the team moved. Agents breached the front lobby and rear loading docks simultaneously, calling out room by room as they cleared the open-plan office in under 4 minutes. Inside, 3 overnight staff, a junior developer and 2 contractors finishing a deployment, were detained briefly, hands flat on their desks, before being identified, questioned, and released without charge. Kovach's residence, a condo in Edgewater, was breached at 3:52 a.m. She was arrested without incident, still in pajamas, her phone seized mid-charge on her nightstand, the screen lighting up with an unread message from Bellamy as agents bagged it. Bellamy's residence in Coral Gables was breached at the same time. He was found in his home office, 3 monitors active, financial spreadsheets open, a half-finished glass of whiskey beside the keyboard. Agents seized 2 laptops and a hard drive later found to contain an unencrypted backup of the full Shell client ledger, the single piece of evidence that would ultimately tie every Shell brokerage transaction back to specific tanker movements. Kovach was transported to the Secret Service's Miami field office and placed in an interview room shortly after 5:30 a.m., still in the clothes she'd been arrested in. According to agents present, she asked for a lawyer within the first 90 seconds and said almost nothing afterward, except, twice, unprompted, that she had never met anyone named Pakzad in a business capacity, a claim directly contradicted by 4 months of badge access logs agents had already pulled. She was released to processing by 9 a.m. and arraigned the following day. Bellamy, by contrast, talked, not a confession. His attorney arrived within the hour and shut down the interview. But in the gap before counsel arrived, he reportedly told agents, almost conversationally, that he'd built cleaner books for worse people, a comment investigators have since flagged as a possible thread into prior, unrelated financial crimes still under review. What strikes us about this case is how unremarkable the actual crime scene looked. No cash, no weapons, just laptops, a mural of a cargo ship, and a kitchen with a cold brew tap, the standard furniture of 100 other Miami startups that never broke a law. The technology that makes wartime shipping chaos navigable is the same technology that, with one falsified invoice template, makes hiding $97 million almost effortless. By 5 a.m., agents had secured the shoreline offices, both residences, and frozen 6 domestic bank accounts, estimated $97 million in identified laundered funds. Of that, approximately $41 million remained traceable to recoverable U.S.-based accounts at the time of the raid. The remaining roughly $56 million had already moved offshore through the Cyprus and Marshall Islands intermediaries, funds investigators confirmed, but had not, as of the raid, recovered. In a windowless evidence room at the Miami field office, a 4-person forensic accounting team spent the next 31 hours mapping the recovered ledger from Bellamy's hard drive line by line, cross-referencing each Shell brokerage entry against AIS vessel tracking timestamps pulled from HSI's maritime database. The work was slow and almost entirely manual. Automated matching software kept failing because the invoice descriptions had been written, deliberately, to be just vague enough to defeat keyword-based fraud detection. By hour 19, the team had confirmed direct links between 18 of the 23 Shell entities and specific tanker movements. The remaining 5 took until the following week, and 2 are still, as of this video, only partially mapped. By mid-morning, the raid looked clean. 3 arrests, 6 frozen accounts, a recovered ledger that would likely support dozens of charges. Agents believed the operational phase of Driftwood was over. Then, at 11:14 a.m., a financial alert flagged movement on a 7th account, one nobody on the team had previously identified, opened only 4 days before the raid, and already half empty. The account had been opened February 14th, the same day the bank compliance email chain surfaced in subpoenaed records. Investigators believe, though haven't confirmed, that someone inside the financial chain, possibly tipped by the earlier compliance dispute resurfacing in subpoena requests, moved to quietly extract additional funds before the operation closed in. By the time agents froze the account on February 18th, Roughly $9.4 million had already been withdrawn in 4 transfers to accounts agents have not yet been able to trace beyond an intermediary bank in Tbilisi, Georgia. That $9.4 million remains unrecovered. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. Structuring an account that cleanly, that quickly, in the 4 days between a subpoena and a raid, requires advanced knowledge most outside actors wouldn't have had. Investigators have not ruled out an internal leak, though no individual has been charged in connection with it. Kovac and Bellamy were charged on February 19th with conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to violate the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and bank fraud. A third executive, Shoreline's head of client operations, Diego Salazar, was charged separately on suspicion of knowingly drafting Shell client onboarding paperwork, though prosecutors noted his cooperation began almost immediately after arrest. Aram Pakzad remains at large. As of this video's filming, federal authorities believe he may have left the country through a third-party visa route in the days before the raid, though his exact location is unconfirmed. There's a piece of this case prosecutors have deliberately kept out of the public record for now. Details about how exactly Pakzad's role connected to the tanker network upstream. If more becomes public as the case proceeds, we'll cover it. Drop a comment if you want a follow-up, once charging documents unseal further. In the weeks following the raid, federal prosecutors built out the broader scope of Operation Driftwood. Financial analysts identified 5 tankers, including the Halcyon Star, whose movements correlated directly with Shoreline Shell client payments between November 2025 and February 2026. 3 of those tankers remain under active Navy and Coast Guard monitoring in international waters near the Strait of Hormuz as of this video's filming. 2 have not been located since mid-February. The estimated $97 million figure itself remains an evolving number. Investigators caution it may grow as additional Shell accounts are identified through the recovered ledger, and that the true scale of the laundering network, how many additional companies, in how many countries, used similar invoice structures, is still being mapped. 22 Shoreline employees lost their jobs the day of the raid. Most, agents confirmed, had no knowledge of the Shell client structure and were never charged. One of them, a 24-year-old back-end engineer named Owen Castellanos, had spent his first 8 months out of college optimizing the route prediction model that, unknown to him, gave the Shell invoices their plausible cover story. He told investigators he'd noticed the dormant client login pattern back in December, accounts paying premium tiers but never querying the platform, and had flagged it internally as a possible bug, only to be told by a manager, almost certainly Bellamy, that it was a data sync issue, low priority. Castellanos voluntarily turned over his Slack messages and engineering logs to agents within days of the raid, and those records ultimately helped establish the platform usage discrepancy that anchored the case's financial timeline. He has not been charged and has since taken a job at an unrelated logistics firm in Tampa. Several other former employees have since spoken to investigators voluntarily, providing internal records that helped corroborate the timeline already built from banking data. Kovac's bail hearing is scheduled for next month. Bellamy was denied bail, deemed a flight risk given the volume of funds still unaccounted for. The $9.4 million withdrawn 4 days before the raid has not been recovered. The roughly $56 million moved offshore through Cyprus, and the Marshall Islands has, as of filming, not been recovered. Aram Pakzad has not been located. The network is dismantled, at least the visible part of it. The wartime conditions that made it possible, a global shipping crisis, a flood of confused freight brokers desperate for routing software, a banking compliance system that can be talked out of a red flag for the right client. None of that has changed. Whether that gap gets closed before the next version of this scheme starts is an open question. Right now, nobody's answered it.